Welcome to the School Lunch Program training module presented by the Maine Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs. This presentation will cover food components that must be offered on school lunch menus as well as other lunch requirements. First, let's talk about the menu planning approach for school meals. School meals are built on a food-based menu planning approach. Menus are planned based on food groups, or what we call food components. There are 5 food components that make up a school lunch meal. This includes fruits, vegetables, protein, or meat alternate, grains, and fluid milk. Please note that milk is its own component and does not comprise all dairy products. All 5 food components must be offered with each meal in order to be reimbursable. So here's a table which shows the lunch meal pattern, which is another term used for menu planning requirements. Please note we're talking about the planned menu. So what you're required to offer students as part of the lunch meal. There is another training module dedicated to the topic of offer versus serve, or what a student must take to be considered a reimbursable meal. So there's a few things I wanted to point out to you as far as the lunch meal pattern goes. The first is there are different requirements for the age grade groupings, which you'll see on your screen. Second, all 5 meal components must be offered every day, regardless of the age grouping. And third, there are minimum quantities that must be offered daily and weekly. And so we'll discuss each of the components in a bit more detail. First, let's start with fluid milk. It's 1 out of the 5 components that must be offered with every meal. The serving size is 1 cup or 8 ounces across all age grade groups. And 2 milk choices must be offered for lunch every day. This can be a combination of any of the milk shown on your screen. And even if your school does not offer flavored milk, 2 meal choices must still be offered. As mentioned earlier, milk is a required food component, and therefore you cannot offer juice or water in place of milk. And sometimes we see these beverages offered as substitutes for milk due to students with food allergies or intolerances. However, these beverages do not have the same nutrient content as milk, and therefore they're not appropriate substitutes. And if you choose to offer juice during mealtime, it must be offered to everyone. The next component we're going to discuss is fruit. There are minimum daily and weekly requirements for the amount of fruit to be offered, and this depends on the grade group. Now, fruit can be offered in many different forms. This can include canned, fresh, frozen, dried, or 100% juice. And if you take a look at the picture on your screen, this is a beautiful salad bar that shows all of the different varieties of fruit that can be offered as fresh in the form of a smoothie or juice. And so it's important to provide choice to students and variety because they're more likely to try something and to consume it. And here are some important notes about fruit offerings for lunch. If juice is offered, no more than half of the weekly fruit offering may be in the form of 100% juice. So for example, if you offer 1 cup of fruit every day for lunch and half a cup comes from juice, you're all set, as you have not exceeded that 50% limit. On the other hand, if you're offering dried fruit, such as raisins or craisins, a 1/4 cup serving counts as a half a cup of creditable fruit. And this is because dried fruit is more concentrated and therefore can be counted as twice the volume served. The next food component is vegetables. They must be offered on a daily basis. And there are a variety of subgroups that have to be offered over the course of the week. And one important note to keep in mind is raw leafy greens, such as spinach and lettuce, credit at half the volume served. So for example, 1 cup of raw leafy greens counts as a half a cup of vegetable. So this is important to note when preparing salads to meet the vegetable offering. And beans and legumes may be used as either a vegetable or a meat alternate, but not both in the same meal. So it's important for the menu planner to be aware of this, as you would need to pick one or the other. So here is a list of the weekly vegetable subgroups and typical vegetables that fall under each category. And so the goal of the subgroups is to expose kids to a variety of vegetables and colors. And just a word of advice, do not assume that just because a vegetable is a certain color that it will fall in that category. So for example, if we look under the other subgroup, beets falls under this category, even though it's a red vegetable. Same with green beans. You might think because bean is in the name of the vegetable that it would fall under the bean/legume category, but it also is another vegetable. And this is because vegetables are categorized based on nutrient content. And it's also important to know that subgroups must be offered with all meal choices, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So this chart shows the vegetable requirements in cups. So if we were to look at the K through 5 column, there's a daily 3/4 cup requirement for vegetables. And over the course of the week, 3 3/4 cup vegetable must be offered. And then below the vegetables, you'll see the subgroups listed. And you can see that the serving sizes are listed under the weekly requirement, or under the weekly column. And we like to refer to the beans category as legumes. This is to avoid some confusion with other vegetables such as green beans and green peas when you think that they might be in a certain category because of their name. So naming the legume category can help avoid some of this confusion. And we find that many schools are meeting the subgroup requirement by having a daily salad bar. It's a nice variety for students while also meeting the different categories. So this is a handy chart to have available in your kitchens. It's a comprehensive list of vegetables that fall under each subgroup. And when in doubt, check the list. It's helpful to have it readily available for planning your menu as well. And I also wanted to share a menu planning tip as far as planning your vegetable subgroups. Some menu planners have different colored highlighters that they use to make sure that they're meeting the subgroup. So they'll actually go through the menu and highlight the dark green and the red, orange, and the other categories. And as a new director, it might also be helpful for you as you become more familiar with the menu planning requirements. So now we're going to take a few moments and do a little subgroup quiz. So just take a few seconds to think about your answer, and then I will give you the correct answer. So the first one we have is spinach. So what subgroup does spinach fall under? This falls under the dark green category. It is a very rich, dark colored green vegetable. Next is iceberg lettuce. And this is in fact an other vegetable. So even though spinach and romaine lettuce falls under the dark green category, iceberg falls under an other vegetable because it's not as nutrient dense as other leafy greens. Next on the list is corn, which is another kid favorite vegetable. And as you might guess, corn is a starchy vegetable. And what about green beans? We did talk about this a little earlier. Regardless of the name, green beans falls under the other category. Next, we have beets. Even though they are a red vegetable, they are considered an other vegetable as far as meal pattern requirements are concerned. How about tomatoes? Tomatoes falls under the red-orange category. So that's an easier one. And lastly, we have green peas. And as you might imagine, peas are considered a starchy vegetable. So pat yourself on the back for getting those right. And now we're going to move into multiple offerings, or if you offer many different meal choices. So in planning your menu and looking at all meal choices, it's important to make sure that vegetable subgroups are offered with all choices. So the example that I have here is we have two entrees. We have baked beans with hot dogs or peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so the baked beans, which would be your legume subgroup, is only offered with the hot dogs and not with the peanut butter and jelly because students have to choose one or the other. So this would be an example of when vegetable subgroups are not offered to all students. So it's just good to be careful with menu planning and looking at all meal choices to make sure that vegetable subgroups are being offered to everyone. Next, we're going to move into the grain component. So if you look under the grades K through 5 column, you'll notice that the minimum daily grain requirement is 1 ounces, but the weekly requirement is 8 ounces. Therefore, you must offer more than 1 ounce on some days of the week to reach your 8 ounces by the end of the week. So we typically recommend offering 2 ounces of grain each day across all age groups to make sure the minimums are covered for everyone. And it just helps simplify menu planning, and you can make sure that all grades are covered. All grains offered in the lunch program must be whole grain rich. And whole grain rich means that there are more whole grain ingredients in the item than non-whole grain. A whole grain retains the 3 parts of the grain which you see on your screen. This includes the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. And these parts contain fiber, vitamins, and minerals that non-whole grain items do not have. So how do we know if a grain we want to serve is whole grain rich? In order to be considered whole grain rich, a grain must contain at least 50% whole grains by weight. So if you're offering a grain product, such as purchasing a whole wheat bread, you would look at the food label and ingredient statement to determine if it is whole grain rich or not. On the other hand, if it's a homemade item, you would look at the recipe to determine if 50% of the grain ingredients are whole grain, as they're listed on the recipe by weight. And any remaining grain ingredients must be enriched. We can tell if a product is whole grain by looking at the ingredients list on the package. So we're going to look at the first ingredient listed. If the whole grain ingredient such as whole grain rolled oats or whole wheat flour is listed first, it's considered whole grain rich. Or if the first ingredient listed is water, followed by the whole grain ingredient, then that is also considered whole grain rich, as long as the word whole is listed as the first ingredient. Be sure to check ingredient labels carefully, as packaging can be deceiving. With the example provided, the package says made with whole grains. When you flip it over, the first ingredient is enriched wheat flour on the ingredients list. Based on the first ingredient listed, would you consider this product whole grain rich? Yes or no? The answer is no, because the first ingredient just says enriched wheat flour, and it must have the word whole to be considered whole grain rich. Even though whole wheat flour is listed later on in the ingredients list, that still doesn't count. So it's really important to become familiar with reading food labels and ingredients lists, because the ingredients will tell you 100% of the time if it is in fact whole grain or not. And so this is a whole grain resource that USDA created, and you might find it helpful. It can be found on the Team Nutrition website on your screen. And this guide includes information such as examples of whole grains that you could offer in the school lunch program, and also how to determine ounce equivalents for grains, which we will discuss in the crediting module. The last and final component to discuss is meat alternate, or MMA for short. Similar to how the grain component is set up, you'll notice that for grades K through 5, there's a weekly meat offering of 8 ounces, and for grades 6 through 8, 9 ounces. Now, because the daily offering is 1 ounce, over the course of the week, more than 1 ounce will need to be offered to meet the weekly minimum. So if you have a K through 8 school, you would want to plan the menu to meet 9 ounces of weekly meat alternate to cover both grade groupings, as you would cover the minimum requirements for grades K through 5 and 6 through 8. And as mentioned with grains, it is best practice to offer 2 ounces of meat alternate in grains each day to ensure the minimums are met. Now here are some foods that would cover the meat alternate component. This includes meats, fish, eggs, cheese, yogurt, nut butters, and we're also seeing more school lunch programs offer vegetarian meals, so tofu and beans would also count as a meat alternate, as long as you're not crediting the bean as a vegetable in the same meal. Not all foods can be counted as a meal component, and the ones listed here are some examples. So these items are considered extra foods or thank you for coming, as they do not count as anything. So this includes cream cheese, bacon, salami, potato chips, and condiments. And these non-creditable foods are determined by USDA. So now we're going to move into some tools and resources that can help assist you with menu planning. So where do you start? There are many menu planning and recipe tools available that can assist you with menu planning and can help streamline the process and hopefully make it less overwhelming. This includes menu planning tools, which I will describe in more detail later on, cycle menus with corresponding recipes, and these were developed by the culinary specialists in the Child Nutrition Office. There are team nutrition recipes, which are kid-friendly and include some ethnic foods. The Child Nutrition Recipe Box, which is a resource from the Institute of Child Nutrition, or ICN. They provide a lot of training and other resources for schools. And this recipe box includes USDA standardized recipes, which are scaled to 50 and 100 servings. And the beauty of standardized recipes is they indicate the meal pattern contribution, which is really helpful for menu planners. And all of these resources are available on the Child Nutrition website. So here's how you can get to the resources. So first, you're going to go to the Child Nutrition homepage, and the link is on your screen. When you get to the homepage, you're going to click the programs link, which is on the left-hand side of the web page. When you get to programs, you're going to scroll down and click on lunch program. When you get to the lunch page, you will need to scroll down to menu planning tools. Please keep in mind that the headings are in alphabetical order. There are 3 menu planning tools I wanted to discuss today. And the blue arrows are right next to each of the tools. So the first one is the Healthy Kansas Meal Component tool. This tool is designed for you to enter your menu electronically, and then the information is automatically transferred to a production record for that meal. So it's both a menu planning and a production record tool. So it may be helpful for those who like to maintain their production records electronically. The second is the Meal Component Calculator, and this was developed by the Child Nutrition staff and is used to check if the meal pattern is met during administrative reviews. It can also be a helpful tool for menu planners as well, and is relatively simple to use. The third one is a menu planning tool provided by the USDA. It's also simple and is another helpful tool that's an option for you to use. So take a look at these resources on our website and see if they work for you. Or if you happen to find something that works better, please let us know so we can add more tools to our list. Here are a few menu planning tips to help ensure the meal pattern requirements are met. As mentioned earlier, it's best practice to plan 2 ounces of grain and meat alternate each day and with each meal choice. As far as the vegetable subgroups are concerned, one suggestion is to plan 1 vegetable subgroup each day. So if you have 5 vegetable subgroups in 5 days of the week, you could have Monday be your legume day, Tuesday could be your starchy day, and so on. If any of your schools use salad bars, these are also a great tool to help meet the vegetable subgroup requirement. Now we're going to talk about some additional requirements in the lunch program that are outside of the menu requirements. Students must have access to free potable water during meal service. This can be done in many different ways and will depend on how your cafeteria is set up and what works best. Some examples include students having access to a water fountain in the cafeteria or adjacent to the cafeteria, and it is best practice to offer cups with this method to make it more readily available. You could also place water pitchers or coolers with cups on a cart or table in the cafeteria. So these are just some simple ways to make sure students have access to water during meal times. Next, we're going to talk about the meal signage requirement. So all foods that are part of a reimbursable meal must be identified before the serving line. And this is to communicate to students what they can select for a meal. The best method will depend on the age of your students. So for example, in this slide, a sample tray is used, which is more helpful for younger students who can't read or may need assistance from an adult to read. It's also a nice visual of the meal being offered to students so they can see what it looks like on the plate. We also typically see a whiteboard with the daily menu posted. However, you would want to make sure that it includes a reminder for students to take a half a cup of fruit and/or vegetable. So it's important to have fun with this and be creative. This is how you're advertising your program to students and staff. Here's another example of meal signage from a school in Maine. They created a colorful banner that's posted in the cafeteria to show the different meal components and what students would have to take. And so this is another example of how to make it fun and also brighten up the cafeteria a little more. So another great example to use. This concludes our school lunch training module. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.